So we got a lot of comments around hitting it 260 yards off the tee and why it's important to becoming a scratch player. So in today's video, we're going to discuss a couple points that are going to back our claims up. And one of those stats is going to be the actual stats of hitting it 260 yards.
Yeah, so some people were sort of, wondering, they were a little skeptical if this was necessary or not. Others were just curious. They just wanted to see like what the actual numbers were. So we're going to dive into that today. So I remember one of the comments was actually a guy saying like, oh, like the club champion at my club, he's a scratch golfer and he only hits like 240 off the tee. Yeah. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later in this video as well. But there's essentially 5 points we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about two right now, the two first ones. So let's talk about the stats.
Okay.
So Golf Digest, first of all, came out with an article last year, 2023.
2023, yep.
And from their findings, they found that 260 was sort of the minimum that they saw for scratch golfers in general. And so that was one. And then the other big one was the database from Arcos. This is on top of your personal experience, obviously. Right. But if you look at Arcos, the average scratch golfer in their teens, 20s, and 30s hit it 273 on average.
On average, so yeah. Further than 260.
So further than 260.
Gotcha.
So 260 is actually being sort of generous, I think, if anything, because that was their average. And then on top of that, the 10 handicappers, so they're only hitting about 234.
So obviously substantially less.
Yeah, so like 40 yards less. And that's actually one of the biggest stat differences you can find between a 10 handicap and a scratch golfer is that extra 40 yards, right? So the next thing, like we got to talk about point two, obviously, is why is this the case and why do we have to hit it that far, which has to do with a far shot is a pure shot.
Right. Yeah. So making sure that hitting the center of the club face is going to give you obviously the most distance possible. So having a 260 average means a combination of miss hits and pure strikes. So obviously it's not solely, we're not saying that like solely speed is the only factor.
No.
But as an example, if you were to swing it faster and you still miss hit it, your ball speed will naturally still be faster than somebody who's slower and also miss hits it.
Absolutely.
So it's making sure that we have in the case of Golf Digest and Arcos, we want to make sure that a scratch player is hitting it on a good shot, is hitting it 275 off the tee, and then a 10 handicapper is obviously that 40 yards of difference is one of the biggest stats that we're trying to project that, or at least highlight, that makes up that handicap difference.
Yeah, so it's a really big step to go like, I'm a 10 and I want to be a scratch. How do you get there, right?
Correct.
And that's why their goal is often going to be like breaking 80, etc. But what we like to do is actually set on a trajectory. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to get to this goal and stop.
Correct.
Once you start getting better, you're going to keep getting better. So stop trying to break 80. Let's try and get to that scratch if we can, or even better than that if we can. And we can't do it all at once. Like when you go to the gym, if I want to lift 400 pounds, I can't just like go and do it.
Right.
I've got to break it up into baby steps. And so what do? We break it down to, do I hit it far enough?
Correct.
So if you hit it 240 right now, and we're talking average, you might, when you hit a good one, okay, you hit it 260 already.
Sure.
But we're talking an average here, which means you probably have to hit it 280 or 270, something like that. Because on your bad hits, your heel misses, all of that stuff, you're going to be hitting it substantially shorter on those hits, right?
Correct. Yeah, and that's what we're saying. Like speed's going to play a massive factor in that. But what we want, like what Logan is saying, is we want to make sure that we are averaging in around 260. So your top end's got to be faster, and then your miss hits will obviously be just naturally be slower. So it's not that distance is the most important metric or speed is the most important metric, but it is a massive contributing factor based on what Golf Digest and Arcos has said. Essentially, it's like, well, that 40 yards of difference between what you think you hit it and what you need to hit it is the difference of you being, or one of the main factors in being a 10 handicap versus a scratch player.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of like all the best golfers I know. I think of you. I think of Branson. I think of Ben. I think of like maybe John Alpaz, like our club champion a lot of the time, or the other club ones. Griffin has been one. Ben McIsaac just won. All these guys that we know, they can obviously all hit it over 260.
Correct.
It's just a sort of a prerequisite. And then the big thing with being able to hit it that far is that you're also going to always have the option to like come back if you need to.
Correct.
But you always can't add distance if you don't have it, right? So if they need to hit a 4-iron for accuracy, they can still hit their 4-iron 220.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where like you're saying, like distance is going to play that major factor, but it's not only a advantage off the tee, it's an advantage with everything else. And we talked about that in one of the previous videos where it's like, listen, if you have a 3-wood into a par 5 and I have a 5-iron into a par 5, I'm statistically, and we have the same type of mechanical issues with like with our golf swing. Let's just say we're completely level. I'm statistically going to be able to hit it closer than somebody who's hitting a 3-wood from like 260. I'm not saying that I hit a 5-iron 260, but if I have less club into holes, there's not going to be as much curve. Right, because there's more loft, so the spin loft won't be as dramatic. So like having 1 or 2 less clubs into holes, you may not think it makes that big of a deal, but over the course of your round, putting yourself in position to actually score. When people hear the word score, they think inside of 150 yards, which I would deem to be true. If you're giving yourself more opportunities to do that with less club, you're statistically going to be able to hit it closer. It doesn't matter what your mechanics necessarily look like unless they're like really dog shit. But most people's mechanics are not that bad. It's more or less just optimizing what they're doing and having the ability to take 1 or 2 less clubs into holes along with having 20 or 30 yards extra off the tee is dramatic.
Yeah, this was a YouTube video we actually talked about making. We still got to do this one. Was like, let's take a 20 handicap and let's put them where your drive is, and then let's see how they play, because they're going to see like, oh, if I could hit it further off the tee, that they're probably going to be like, you know, I don't know, 4 or 5 strokes. We'll find out when we do it, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong, like hitting it straighter is important, but it's a combination. But like you were saying previously, like, the barrier to entry is hitting a 260 off the tee. Yeah. Once we can establish how to do that, we can definitely hone in what your mechanics look like, and we can progressively work into short game and putting after that. Yeah,
so that's probably enough for this video, but we are going to make a part 2 with 3 more reasons why you got to hit at 260 to be able to be a scratch golfer.
Stay tuned.